If we're going to help facilitate a movement in rural North America, and by the way, I want to encourage you to say North America as well, because there's lots of rural places in Canada. We're a little less represented with Canadians here, but at the Rural Matters Institute, we're going to be focusing on North America as a whole, U.S. and Canada. And so as we think about some of these issues, one of the things we have to do is, we've heard exhortation Jeff laid before us to write. Actually, Charlie did, and then Jeff said, we got to write our missiology, we got to write some of these things, we got to lay some of these things out. One of the things also we have to do is to know. Now again, let me explain what I mean by that, because I think one of the challenges is everyone wants to love something. They want to love their city, they want to love their community, they want to love rural North America, they want to love something. Well, I'm convinced that you can't love a community if you don't know a community. Now, this is really key. You can't love a community if you don't know a community. And one of the things that we find is that there is a lot of work and research that's been done in, for example, in doctoral dissertations. I have shelves of doctoral dissertations of people who go to people groups. For example, I've got a doctoral dissertation on the Pokot in Africa. You can get doctoral dissertation on the Quechua in the highlands of Peru, the Iban in Malaysia. You can get all kinds of research, what we call ethno-linguistic or ethnographic research on people groups around the world. Matter of fact, Jeff Clark, who you met yesterday, actually does that. That's some of what he's done. And so, but the question then is, do we have the kind of research that helps us understand rural North America? And the answer is at a much lower level. As a matter of fact, there are some people groups around the world where there's been more research done than on some contexts that in North America where universities exist and are evident. And so what we wanted to do today is and I'm not saying that these are not going to be inspirational, but they're primarily going to be informational to help you understand some of the context more broadly. And so actually we have two speakers. We're going to do a segment here, an hour segment on information, and then we're going to continue kind of walking through our processes here. We're talking about some encouragement, some teaching, some understanding of the context. But the two sessions of information are going to be brought to you by two leaders who I'll explain each one at a time. Both hold doctorates, both are laying out research in their fields and beyond their fields, as well as they've examined new background and new information. The first presenter is going to be Dr. Karen Swanson. Dr. Swanson is the director of the Institute for Prison Ministries at the Billy Graham Center, where I work, in Wheaton College. Dr. Swanson, matter of fact, does wonderful ministry. We just had a mentoring group over at our house of some of the folks she's been in a mentoring group with a long time, some of the key leaders in and around this area. And you say, why is there a correlation? Well, for many of you, I don't have to tell you, immediately when I talk about prison and jail ministry, you recognize, a lot of head shaking, you recognize that has become a major context in rural America, and as well as an opportunity there. Now, not for all of you, but for many of you, this will become an immediate, oh, this makes sense, but now we want to give you information. For those of you watching via video later, let me encourage you as always to go to the Institute of Prison Ministries website. You can get more information there as well. Also, we'll have this presentation along with several others at the Rural Matters Institute website as well. So, Dr. Swanson, if you can, where are you? There you are. If you can work your way up here, Dr. Swanson has been serving in these roles, leading out, providing directional leadership. She leads the Correctional Ministries and Chaplains Association, helping people to engage in ministry. She's actively engaged to incarcerated and previously incarcerated individuals, and most importantly, just deeply loves Jesus and ministering in and around prison context. So she's the director of the Prison Institute of Prison Ministries at the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College. Join me in welcoming Dr. Swanson.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. So thank you, Wes, for inviting me here. I always come everywhere as a learner, and I thank you so much for what I was able to learn yesterday, and am looking forward to what I'm going to learn today. I love rural communities. My husband grew up in Utan, Nebraska. Okay, yeah, that's right, about 1,200 people, and he was always quick to remind me that he was voted Senior Athlete of the Year for his class. And I said, well, you had 26 people in your class, and half of them were girls. Okay, so that kind of shot that down. But anyway, and then I also lived 4 years in Upland, Indiana, when I coached college volleyball and softball at Taylor University. So I have some context, or have been living in rural America a little bit. Unfortunately, God has called me to the Chicago area, but I'm waiting for a new call. Anyway, sorry. I thought you might like that, Ed. Just kidding. All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about prison. I'm going to give you an overview of the whole mass incarceration in the U.S., and then I'm going to bring in some research on rural jails that has recently come out, as well as some research that was done on pastors' views of prison ministry. And then I'll highlight a few ways of engaging in correctional ministry. So this is a mission field in your backyard, okay? So the U.S. holds 5% of the world's population and about 25% of the inmate population. We incarcerate more people than anyone in the world, okay? So you got about 2.3 million people behind bars. So that's jails and prisons. Okay. Now you can't see this graph, and so this is where you'll get this PowerPoint, but you can see on here that state prisons are in kind of the teal colored. So there's a lot of people in state prisons. There's some in the local jails, so you got about a little over half in state prisons, about a quarter in the local jails, and then you got federal jails as well as Indian reservations, immigration. So there's a lot of places where people are locked up. Okay. So just a quick question. How many of you have ever visited a jail or prison? Just kind of want to see. Awesome. Love it. Great. Okay. So you may know the difference between a jail and a prison, but a lot of people don't know the difference. So a jail, and there's currently over 3,000 jails in the U.S., and they have all security levels. So everybody in that county goes to the jail, okay? And unless it's a really big jail, and then they separate by classification, crime, as well as gender. But most of the people in the jail are pre-trial, so it's kind of like a holding tank for people waiting to have their case resolved. Only about 39% are serving their time, so they've been sentenced to a year or less. And again, this varies by state and locality. Okay, 84% of the jails also, though, hold people out of their jurisdiction. In other words, they are renting beds, and I'll get to that a little bit. Some people come in and serve a few hours in the jail. Some people serve years, and again, depending upon the county. Most house male and female and youth altogether, and females tend to comprise about 13% of the people who are incarcerated in jail. So these are kind of national statistics, and again, it's going to vary by your county. Prisons, on the other hand, you have state, federal, and private prisons. So if you want to get stuck in prisons, you can. All right, so you got, and the thing is with rural or with prisons, most often they're located in rural communities. Very few times are they located in big cities. So again, this is another mission field, maybe close to you, maybe not. They're designated by security levels, so you might have maximum, minimum, medium. And it's for people who have been sentenced to a year or more. The federal system, people average their stay is 37.5 months is how long they stay there. And again, it's separated by gender. So you have male prisons and you have female prisons. And the female population comprises about 7%. So the primary population of people incarcerated are men. Okay, the other thing though is that you look at 2.3 million people doing time, but that affects a lot of families. So the families are also doing time, and I'm going to highlight just a little bit of the families as well as the inmates. So the impact on the families is, again, there's feelings of shame, of social stigma, there's financial strain if the person was the breadwinner, there's physical and emotional stress, there's lack of external resources to now meet their needs, there's visitation that may be a challenge after the person is sentenced, or if your jail is housing people from other states, other counties. So there's all of those challenges, and there's a lot more. Children are also doing time. 1 in every 50 children have a parent incarcerated in the U.S. 58% of children of prisoners are under the age of 10. So again, a whole nother mission field of people who are impacted by crime and incarceration. Okay, so why should we care as Christians? Well, it's pretty obvious. The Bible's pretty clear on that. In Luke, talks about this. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So this is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. He wants us to care. This is probably one of the most common passages, Matthew 25. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. And I hope your sermon doesn't stop there. But if you preach on this, that you continue on. I was in prison, and you came to me. Truly I say to you, that the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. And the first part of this verse is really what's called re-entry. When people come back into the community, they need clothes, they need drink, they need shelter, they need care with their mental illness or mental needs, as well as physical needs. But also it reflects God's heart, because not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. This is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. So the gospel is not just for people who don't commit a crime, but the gospel is for anyone. Anyone is redeemable, no matter what they've done, no matter who they are. And the mission, the Great Commission, to go and make disciples. And again, we're not looking at going and making converts and chalking up, this many inmates made a decision, but we're looking to invest in the lives of people and making disciples, followers of Christ. Lenny Spitali wrote a book called Prison Ministry, Understanding Prison Culture Inside and Out. It's probably one of the best books if you're ministering, especially to men. And if you've never done time, it really gives you an understanding. But he says this: I do not know of any more fertile ground for the gospel in all the United States than our jails and prisons. I make that statement unequivocally and without reservation. If you're looking for a more fertile harvest field apart from leaving the country, you'll be hard-pressed to find it. So there's a lot of openness and a lot of reception to the gospel message. But the importance is that we can't just, people come to Christ out of need, but they stay with Christ when they understand the fullness of salvation, and they understand the fullness of the gospel. And so we need to make sure that it's not just jailhouse religion or prison religion, and making sure that we disciple and help them to really own their faith. I think the other aspect of correctional ministry, and I use the term correctional ministry because that includes jails, prisons, ministry to families, ministry to victims, ministry to correctional staff, any aspect that's related to crime. Another aspect is one ministry, but the other one is to pursue justice. Proverbs says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the right of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And the people that research has shown to be the most discriminated against and unjustly treated by our legal system are the people who are poor and the people who are minorities. So if you have poor people in your community and you have minorities and they engage the legal system, they will be treated typically in a discriminate way than somebody who is wealthy or somebody who is in the majority. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. Then the Lord God Almighty will be with you, just as you say he is. Hate evil, love good. Maintain justice in the courts. And the last verse there, therefore, this is what the Lord, the God Almighty says, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Tim Keller talks about justice, and he says, the gospel motivates us to the ministry of personal and social reconciliation. Evangelism is the most basic and radical ministry possible to a human being. This is true not because the spiritual is more important than the physical, but because the eternal is more important than the temporal. If there is a God and life with him for eternity is based on having a saving relationship with him, then the most loving thing anyone can do for one's own neighbor is to help him or her to have a saving faith in that God. So we can't just meet the physical needs and ignore the spiritual side as well. There has to be both. But doing justice is inseparably connected to preaching grace. This is true in two ways. One way is that the gospel produces a concern for the poor. The other is the deeds of justice gain credibility for the preaching of the gospel. In other words, justification by faith leads to doing justice, and doing justice can make many seek to be justified by faith. So again, it's not an either or. As Christians, we are not only to share the gospel, but we're also to meet the needs and to pursue justice. And I think another area is rooting out injustice. Major social reform movements have always had faith commitments at their center. So if we want to make a change in our country of moving more toward justice and less toward the injustice of our current legal system, then it has to be the church. When Martin Luther King Jr. saw the injustice in society and the church's involvement, he did not say, let's move away from the hypocritical church and its beliefs, but rather he said, let's move deeper into the beliefs of the church and of Christ to solve this problem. Injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. It won't change on its own forever. And again, I don't know what your community makeup is. You know, I look around here and I don't see a lot of people of color. And I think that this is something that we need to work on, is making sure that we bring people of color, that we are united with them as we pursue and grow in rural ministries. So, out of sight. This is a research that recently came out, the growth of jails in rural America. So again, there's over 3,000 jails, and almost 2,000 of them are located in rural communities. There's an increase in the whites who are incarcerated, as well as there's been an increase in the number of women. And again, nationwide crime rates are down. And again, there's no simple, single answer as to why this increase in population has occurred. Just like with mass incarceration, there's not one cause. There's multiple causes. It's very complex. But understanding rural growth, two things that they pointed out in the research. One is that rural communities have fewer resources and fewer alternatives. So they may not have, they might have a traveling judge, they don't have a prosecutor or defense attorney right there. So they have few pretrial service programs to deal with maybe addictions, or they don't have maybe a domestic violence court. So they lack some of that, as well as diversionary programs. So instead of being incarcerated, you go through drug court or some of these other specialty kind of courts. So there's fewer resources, and so people might spend time longer waiting to have their case resolved. Another incentive has been the financial incentives. So people who are in communities are lacking financial resources, and so they gain money by boarding inmates for other county jails, state prisons, Federal Bureau of Prisons, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. So again, this would be a whole different population that you would be ministering with. So again, I can give you general statistics and general information, but the reality is your jail is community specific. Your prison is state specific. So people always ask me, well, how do I start a prison ministry? Okay, there's no cookie cutter approach. You got to find out the context of where you are. What are the needs that are there? And I'll get into that in a little bit. So another research study was Pastors' Views on Prison Ministry, put out by Lifeway in 2016. So over 1,000 pastors were interviewed, and these are just a few of the questions that were asked were about the number of congregants in the jail or prison, the number of congregants with a loved one who's incarcerated, because this is sometimes not talked about, the level of preparation of pastors to minister, and injustices in the U.S. system. Okay. I'm just going to highlight a few of the findings. And one is that 97% agree that churches should care for families of the incarcerated. I think, that's probably be pretty common here, represented. As well as 95% believe that churches should provide resources for people when they get out, when they come back into the community. Okay, so there's a strong belief that the church should be doing something. But what happens is there's a disconnect between what the church believes we should be doing, or pastors should believe we should be doing, and what is actually being done. And so they talked about some of the activities that are going on, and it might be individuals that are ministering in the correctional facility. It might be a team from the church, individuals, members ministering to families is a pretty high level. Our church has a formal ministry, so sometimes it's only, Bob and Sue go to the jail and teach a Bible study. A lot of times that's what is seen as the church's correctional ministry, okay? So the pastors were also asked which of the following activities they're currently involved in, and they talked about here about imprisonment, openly, talking about imprisonment openly so that there is no stigma, there is no shame. If somebody in their congregation becomes incarcerated, it's not a taboo topic. We all make mistakes. A lot of people in the Bible should have gone to prison, okay? Should have had the death penalty, if you look at who, some of the heroes of the Bible are, all right? But as well as financially support. So the question kind of thing is prison ministry on your radar? And a lot of you have visited, so at least you have some interest or some experience. So which of the following barriers, and this is the area I wanted to hit on a little bit, is one of the barriers is the lack of volunteers to lead it. And I understand pastors are overworked, underpaid, all of that kind of stuff, which is the same for chaplains, only worse. Okay, believe it or not. Okay, so having volunteers to lead it. But you know how I got involved in prison ministry is I never thought about inmates, okay? So I had a friend who was going to go teach in a faith-based program at Cook County, which is a population of anywhere between 9,000 and 11,000 inmates, okay? And she was going to go there and teach in a faith-based program in a men's maximum security level, but she was afraid to drive down there by herself and asked if I would go with her. I said, sure, I'll go. That was my introduction to correctional ministry. And that one time, God hooked my heart. And over a 7-year time, growing passion and leading to where I am today. Okay? So sometimes there needs to be an invitation. There needs to be easy entry points for volunteers to even know that this is a possibility. The lack of training. And again, training is important. It'd be no different than for me to say, well, I love Jesus, so I'm going to go start a church without any kind of training or background. This is a specialized ministry, and to do it well, you need to have some training. And we're in that process of creating some online easy training to help people get, where they feel comfortable in different kinds of ministry. The lack of finances. You can do a lot of ministry within the context of your church that you're already doing. You don't have to don't start a new ministry, just kind of do what you're already doing. If you have small groups, maybe the small group could adopt a family or adopt a prisoner or whatever, kind of thing. Or as a church, you might adopt a prison, and that's going to be your satellite campus. I mean, there's lots of different ways of doing it where it doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot of money. Don't know where to start, and I'm going to hit on that, okay? Our church has too many other ministries. And again, it looked like, 95% said this is important, this is a priority of the church, but then there's this kind of a percentage. And it's like it's either a priority or it's not. So something to think about. So what are the barriers for your church? And this is where I would love to get just a couple ideas from you. From a rural context, what would be barriers for you of ministering within your local jail? Yeah. Okay, so one of the barriers is fear that people have, because a lot of times their belief of who's behind bars is based on TV, and that's where they're getting their beliefs, as well as sex offenders. Okay, good. That helps me to know what things to address. Other barriers that people might have. Yeah. Hard to get access. It's a good point. So again, this is where oftentimes when we think of correctional ministry, we think of going into the facility. But there's a lot of things you can do to minister to the families and to others on the outside. But access is a big part of it. If you're at a place where, the local jail is a very small jail, you might just go to coffee with the jailer and he's like, yeah, you can come in. But if you're at a place where there's a prison or a larger jail, then you got to go through the background checks and training, and sometimes that takes time. So yes, access is key. So the key to getting in is if they have a chaplain, working through the chaplain, otherwise going through whoever is over the inmate programs, if they have that, or whoever the sheriff is. Okay. Other barriers. Lack of compassion for opiate addicts. Okay, so sometimes we have different views of different types of people that commit different types of crime. So we're okay to accept this crime, but not this crime, or this person's redeemable, this person's not. It's because they made bad choices. So it's again looking at understanding the pathway to crime and the different pathways. Okay, and there's different pathways for men into crime as well as for women into crime. And for women, a lot of it has to do with the beginning with trauma. And then they have mental illness, PTSD, or depression, and they deal with that through addictions, and then crime to support the addiction. So it's all intertwined. So again, understanding and having compassion as well, instead of coming in judgmental. Okay, good. Any other barriers? Yeah. Yes. Right. Okay, so correctional ministry is vast, and because I'm going to hit on some other ministry areas, and you can't do it alone. One church cannot do all this needed in the area of correctional ministry. You have to collaborate with other churches, and so as you kind of embrace your community and work together as a community, you have to be able to collaborate with other churches and not duplicate ministry as well, to be good stewards of that. So. Good, those are helpful for me. If you have others, feel free to email Wes or me, and I would love to hear from you. So let me just, correctional ministry opportunities. So when I, again, use the term correctional ministry, it includes preventing crime, because you might be and say, you know what, I can't do this, but I can adopt this school that has a lot of at-risk kids, and that we can pour into them to prevent them. Because there's a school-to-prison pipeline, there's a cradle-to-prison pipeline, and so there may be some way of prevention. It might be just some kind of ministry inside or outside, but it's also involving everyone affected, the victim, the families, and the person the offender. But it's about helping them understand the transforming message of the gospel. Everybody with holistic care, all done in love. So, what happens is kind of this. You're in the community, you commit a crime or an offense, you're arrested, you go to jail. If you are found guilty, you go into prison, if it's over a year. But then you come back into the community. 95% of everyone who is incarcerated is eventually returned to society. So most people are going to come back. So this is sort of their pathway. So you look and see, well, there's opportunities for prevention, there's opportunities for ministry while they're incarcerated, there's opportunities for when they get out. Sometimes it's just going in the community, you're in the community, you commit the crime, you go to jail, and then you come right back into the community because it's not over a year. So there's that, again, there's reentry issues, which we'll talk about. So again, lacking volunteers, I talked about creating ministry champions. If you have somebody who really loves going in, have them share with others. Have them take people with them to a Bible study to get rid of the myth of who's behind bars. Because proximity will help you to have compassion as well as get rid of the myths about people who are incarcerated. And again, easy ministry opportunities, entry points. And I can help provide some of those. Okay, one-on-one ministry. There's all kinds of one-on-one sharing Christ. Just meeting with someone. Hey, can I pray with you? Tell me your story. I mean, you want to be prepared to share Christ, but that's not your goal. The goal is to just journey with that person, because sometimes they just need someone to talk to. Mentor, visit, and journey with them. Teach a Bible study. Lead a worship service. Some places have adopted a unit or adopted the prison, like I said, and they provide worship. Teach life skills, how to think responsibly, anger management, parenting skills. Maybe an exploring Christianity class, an addiction recovery. So there's lots of, again, opportunities inside. Now, you can also provide physical. Now, you might say, well, I'm going to go provide Bibles, but if they don't have glasses, they can't read the Bible. Okay, so you might say, well, I'm going to provide glasses for people that are here. Or hygiene products, because they don't have them. One local jail, they provided sports bras for the women because they didn't have any bras. And it just helps with their dignity because they were using the other bras as tattoo guns, okay, because they were taking the wires out and using it to make tattoos while they're in prison. They're very creative. Anyway, so there might be some areas of ministry that you've never even thought about. Pen pal, again, visit. I recently had a father call me and said, hey, can somebody go visit my son? He's in the local jail by you. I live in Pennsylvania. And so we got somebody to go visit him because he was lonely. He didn't have anybody to talk to. There's a ministry that corrects Bible studies from inmates all over the U.S. Again, prayer is key. So you got reentry, people transitioning from incarceration back into the community, and then you also have reintegration, because there's a difference between reentry and reintegration, helping them then to belong, to feel part of that community. Here's a list of needs of all that's needed when somebody comes back into your community. Identification. You can't get a job without an ID. You need personal items, hygiene products, food, clothing, safe housing, transportation, employment, health care, medical care, a life coach to kind of journey with you, education, reconciliation with the family. Maybe it's custody issues. Maybe it's childcare while you go to work, connection with a spiritual community, support groups with your addiction, maybe legal assistance because you're behind on child payments or whatever, other court-ordered requirements. And it's overwhelming, okay? And so again, you can minister journeying with families, meeting their physical needs, meeting their spiritual needs, facilitate keeping the family together. Again, research shows that if the family stays together, the person who's coming out has a greater chance of success. Ministering with families and visiting loved ones, helping them get to where they need to go. If you're by a prison, you got people coming from other parts of the state to visit their inmate. I know one place, they created a family center for people to come and just kind of rest or, they fed them a meal and they ministered to the kids. So, because they're coming a long distance to meet with their loved one. Lack of training. Again, we're going to have some training online as well as I'm creating some correctional ministry briefs that will help you. How do you work with a sex offender who wants to come to your church? How do you, go in, how do you journey alongside a family? What do you do when someone in your congregation gets arrested? How do you do a visit? So we're going to have some of those available. Again, we talked about finances, use existing programs, and be creative. We talked about, the 6-man football. You can be creative. Don't know where to start, and this is where, again, I say find out what the needs are first in your community, because it's very unique. Ask the sheriff. Ask the chaplain if there is one. Maybe you become the chaplain. Ask whoever the warden is or over programs. And if you're by a prison, there's a whole nother population to think about, and that's working with correctional staff. The life expectancy for correctional staff is 59. After they retire, all of that, because of the stress of their job. They also have high suicide rate, high addiction rate, high domestic violence. It's a whole nother mission field of working with correctional staff. So again, looking to see what are the needs, what is your church capable of meeting. So again, don't ignore this mission field in your backyard. Go and make disciples.